Very good evening. Thanks for joining us here on the Sunday edition of Urban Debate. I'm Afrida Rahaman Ali. Well, surrogacy has been in the news recently. Most people would say because of actor Priyanka Chopra, who announced the arrival of her baby via surrogacy. But what is more important to note is that the country has passed the Surrogacy Regulation Bill and the ART, Assisted Reproductive Technology Regulation Bill, in Parliament last month to curb unethical practices related to issues of sex selection and exploitation of the surrogate. It has now come into force last week. Examples of cases where Bollywood celebrities opt for surrogacy are aplenty. We know Shah Rukh Khan and Gauri surprised everyone when they welcomed their third child via surrogacy in 2013. Amir Khan and Kiran became parents to Azad via surrogacy in 2011. More recently, people congratulated Priyanka Chopra and Nick Jonas on the good news, while some others were also critical of this entire process. Of course, morality issues come in and people talk about how this is about outsourcing a child's birth. But this issue is not about morality. This is an issue that needs a careful consideration. Now, with the new regulation in place, let's first quickly understand the salient points of the Assisted Reproductive Technology Act, the ART Act, and the Surrogacy Regulation. My colleague Archana will take us through the new regulation. Archana?
Thank you, Frida. So for the benefit of our viewers, let's explain this in detail. So essentially, India now finally has a law that regulates IVF clinics and surrogacy. So the latest is that on Tuesday, government notified two acts. So one is Surrogacy Regulation Act 2021 and Assisted Reproductive Technology 2021. So this essentially, these are the two acts, and what they essentially do is that they aim to regulate IVF clinics and prohibit commercial surrogacy in the country. So this is the main objective of this law. The next thing is that Surrogacy Act now allows altruistic surrogacy but bans commercial surrogacy. Now, what is altruistic surrogacy? Basically, there is no involvement of any compensation, any money. This is only medical expenses and insurance coverage that's taken care during the pregnancy. Now, the next point is that this Act also aims to establish a national surrogacy board. It now allows willing women instead of near relative to be a surrogate mother. This is a very important aspect of this law. The next point is, and as I have explained, that this also aims to establish a national board and also boards and respective authorities at the state level. This is the latest, and another salient feature of this new notified law is that no woman shall act as a surrogate more than once in her lifetime. So this is also a very important feature of this law, and the government, including the health minister and all the higher authorities, have hailed this act as a progressive move. This essentially bans commercial surrogacy and aims to regulate IVF clinics in the country. Over to you, Afrida.
Thank you, Archana, for joining us and explaining to us the important points of that act. Let me now welcome, joining us today from London, Dr. Prabha Koteeswaran, Professor of Law and Social Justice, King's College, London. Very warm welcome to you, Professor Koteeswaran. We really appreciate your taking out time for us here on Mirror. Now, I want to first understand from you, you would have studied this regulation threadbare, and help us understand this. When we say a willing woman, not necessarily a relative, would that resolve issues? And we understand that the idea is to ensure that there is no commercial exploitation, but will it be for the greater common good? Will it help those childless couples looking to have a child through surrogacy?
Thank you so much for having me on your show. I think the very simple answer to your question is no. I think the ideals of both the acts are quite lofty, and we've been, trying to finalize these laws for several years now, since 2005, when the Indian Council for Medical Research came up with regulations, or rather guidelines, on both ART as well as surrogacy. So since 2016, we've seen that the government has tried to restrict surrogates to being close relatives. The understanding is that, if surrogacy is performed within the family by a close relative, there's less chances of exploitation, there's less chances of the baby being abandoned in case there was some kind of problem or medical issue, and that this would be preferred to commercial surrogacy. But unfortunately, the conditions, as your colleague rightly pointed out, is that a surrogate has to be between the ages of 25 and 35, be married, have a child. There are good reasons for this kind of requirement, but the problem is that identifying a close relative who meets these conditions means that you have a very limited pool of women who can actually act as a surrogate for you. So, quite in a welcome move, the Select Committee of the Rajya Sabha, when looking at the Surrogacy Regulation Bill of 2019, examined these criteria and thought that this was too restrictive. So actually, we need to expand it to include a willing woman. Now, this is very, very welcome, except you have to understand what the Act is saying about how a commissioning couple can be connected to a surrogate. And so any kind of intermediation is completely prohibited under the law, because obviously you don't want third parties facilitating this for a fee. You want to take out the commercial aspect of the transaction. Not only that, you want to make it altruistic, which is you don't want to compensate the surrogate because that introduces an element of commercialization. So what this effectively then does is that the commissioning couple has to look around them and see, who in my pool, in my social circle can act as a surrogate for me. So either it has to be a close relative or a friend or a work colleague or a neighbor or a woman who works within your household. So also on the... So it's a very limited pool, again, of women who can act as surrogates.
Yes, two important points you made, and just for clarity, yes, you're very clear that this is going to limit options for any intending couple, commissioning couple. And number two, you're saying that this is going to do away with intermediaries. But as we all know in India, the moment a law comes in, there are enough and more ways by which people manage to subvert the law. Will it lead to more illegalities in that sense? That becomes a question. The stipulations, now there are two kinds of criteria that have been actually talked about. One is eligibility criteria for a surrogate mother, and the other is for eligibility for the commissioning couple as well. Who can opt for such a process? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I saw the lead into the program was about, couples who are commissioning surrogacy, wealthy commissioning parents, typically actors from Bollywood. So the question is, the acts are very clear that, we will, this is the legislative prerogative to say that we will allow only couples who have a medical indication to commission surrogacy. So, if you want to have surrogacy for whatever reasons you have, that's up to you, but you cannot do it in India. In India, you'd have to have some kind of medical indication, and you'd have to get a whole number of documents from several state bodies. You need a certificate of eligibility, of essentiality, you need a parentage order, which ensures the parentage and the custody of the baby that's born. And if you're an OCI or PIO, then you also need a letter of recommendation from the board. So there are very strict regulations around who can commission. And of course, a single woman who's either a widow or a divorcee between the ages of 35 and 45 can also commission surrogacy. But of course, this completely excludes a whole range of millions of cohabiting couples, same-sex couples, single men, trans people. So it's deeply exclusionary. And in some senses, I think there's been so many shifts in the jurisprudence around, same-sex marriage, the fact that it's not around same-sex relationships, and the fact that it's not illegal anymore. It really begs the question why they cannot also have the right to form families, or why single men can't, or women who are not widows or divorcees, why can they not, commission surrogacy?
Absolutely. So, that's a question we are asking. Like you said, it's exclusionary. What I also find extremely important at this point of time to talk about is, while the center is actually calling this a progressive move, from all that you have told us, it doesn't sound progressive at all. If it excludes live-in couples, it excludes same-sex couples, transgenders, a whole lot of people who are not capable of having a child by natural process, that very segment is excluded. Isn't that ironical and also unfortunate?
Yeah, it's deeply problematic. And I think what also has happened, throughout these bills when they were being debated, the focus is always on the commissioning couples, right? The focus is not really on the surrogates. So although you're saying you want to prevent the exploitation of surrogates, in effect, what you're saying is that we demand that you be altruistic, that, you may be a mother who already has commitments to your own family. You may actually have a job. You're expected to either quit the job or, take time off for, very lengthy medical appointments. And, so we will not compensate you for that labor at all. All we will do is provide for some kind of insurance. So in case there is a medical complication or emergency, then the surrogate will be covered. Otherwise, we will not compensate you for the lost time or the services. This is deeply problematic. And it's the same thing for egg donation as well. There's some, insurance coverage, but even medical expenses are not covered. So the question is, why are women being demanded to, perform this kind of labor? And then, so on the face of it, it looks as though you're trying to be progressive and prevent exploitation. But the reality is that in India, there's a very high premium on having children and being married. There's a high demand for ART. There are 27 million infertile couples apparently. And, there are very few babies who are available for adoption. So not many couples can also go down that path. And then you have, a lot of women who are quite poor. So you have high levels of socioeconomic inequality. So if you take, if you then have this mix, this socioeconomic context with this high levels of inequality, great demand, great supply, and then you bring in a criminal law, essentially, what happens is that you create an informal, illegal market where the women themselves bear the brunt of the criminalization. So if a surrogate enters into an informal arrangement because, a formal arrangement is illegal and something goes wrong, she has to bear the price.
So in that sense, Prabha, if I'm not mistaken, this can do more harm than good. And
absolutely.
You've also very, clearly pointed out that, the rich and the powerful and the wealthy, the affluent have opted for surrogacy. And this is a country where the divide between the haves and the have-nots is very stark. And we all know that there is a place, particularly in Gujarat, where this is a thriving business. It's a matter of livelihood as well for many women. Now, my question is, why would anybody sign up? If the commercial aspect is taken away, purely can altruism sustain surrogacy? You only are allowed to look within your immediate circle of family. It is as good as an overt way of doing away with surrogacy, you think?
Yes, I think, and that, we have to acknowledge that may well be a legitimate aim of the government, because there are European countries that don't allow any kind of surrogacy, not even altruistic surrogacy.
Okay.
There are some countries that allow, like California has a full-blown commercial surrogacy sector. So it is the prerogative of Parliament to decide where they want to draw the line. And in India, the line is being drawn very narrowly. We are saying we will not prohibit altruistic surrogacy, but we don't want people resorting to this willy-nilly. We want a very small group of people under very restricted conditions to avail of surrogacy. But of course, the reality, and then of course, for a very long time, the sector was not regulated by specific law. So that is very welcome. The fact that you have surrogacy boards, you have, registration authorities, you have a national registry, so that, and then you have to get all these certificates from various, government agencies. So I think that kind of regulation is definitely welcome. But the reality of it is that, will these acts be enforced? Because, you're giving the responsibility now to the police, essentially, to, to regulate this. And, most Indians don't necessarily have an understanding of the scientific nuances of IVF and ART and surrogacy. So, you're actually, in effect, you're going to allow vast aspects of the sector to be going unregulated.
Okay.
And this is going to be problematic.
Yes, this regulation, unfortunately, as it turns out, might lead to more unregulated surrogacy. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But like you said, this amount of regulation and law is welcome, at least insofar as it restricts exploitation of women. If it restricts malpractices in this kind of business, that is welcome. But we have to, again, be very careful when we look at a law like this. Let's hope that it does not facilitate more illegalities because of the stringency of this particular law. Prabha Kotiswaran, thank you so much for joining us this evening.